This is BibleQuest. We're glad you're able to join us tonight, and it's going to be a continuation of the subject that we started a week ago, well, a couple of weeks ago. How you doing, Kenny?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. How you doing, Carl?
Doing just great. Good to be back with you guys again, and looking forward to getting back to our subject here of the destruction of Jerusalem.
So let's get right into it. We're going to be looking at what were we going to start in Mark 13?
Yeah, we'll start the reading in Mark 13 at verse 14. We're going to pick up. Jesus is going to give them the sign. They were asking for a sign of when this temple would be destroyed. By the context is what we're looking at. So we'll pick up the reading in verse 14 down to 23.
Perfect.
All right. Starting at verse 14. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything out. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as not been from beginning of creation that God created until now, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all things beforehand.
All right. So this is the text that gets everybody in a tizzy. Especially there's a few things in here that, boy, they sound pretty incredible. And then you get this really strange abomination of desolation. And when you get language like this and people aren't familiar with the Old Testament, they start imagining all kinds of fantastical things in the future. And really, Jesus is calling attention to things that were mentioned in the past already. He's talking about an event that's going to happen that they wanted to know about. He's told them that they need to be ready. That's where he just left off, telling the apostles specifically. He's having a conversation with 4 apostles. They need to be ready and preaching the gospel of the kingdom. That when this physical temple is destroyed, they need to have established a spiritual temple in its place. That's how the gospel is meant to work. And so they're going to be taking this gospel out to all nations and bringing people into the spiritual temple of God.
So, Carl,
yeah,
that harmonizes exactly with what Jesus said to Pilate. His kingdom is not of this world.
And with lots of other things that the Bible says.
Yeah.
But if you're looking,
the harmony is there. You just have to look and see the connection. Well, go ahead. I interrupt you. You go right ahead.
No, you're great. If you start with the Bible, though, and look for those harmonies, you'll see them. If you start with the world and try to bring things in that seem sort of fantastical, you'll find that too. You're going to be able to make these prophecies that are ambiguous sounding at first apply to almost anything. But Jesus said that before when there's wars and rumors of wars. He said, don't worry about that. These are just the beginning of birth pangs. This is the stuff that's going on all the time because sin is in the world. But he is going to give them a sign to look for. And so this is it. This section deals with the sign. Now, the question is this the sign of his second return in judgment and the end of the world? That's what everybody says. Or is this a sign within the context that he's talking about, which is the destruction of the temple and the end of the age? If you want to talk about it that way, that's a question they asked in Matthew. It's the end of the Jewish age. It is no longer possible to be a faithful Jew without the temple and without the register of the lineage of who you are. You can't be a Judah Jew, which is going to be the kingly line. You can't be a Levitical Jew without the lineage. And that's going to be destroyed by the Romans in this event that he's talking about. So it is the end of an age. And so when they ask this question about when is this going to happen, he's going to give them some concrete answers. Now, these concrete answers are going to be talking about a specific time period. He's not going to give them the day. He's going to say, in fact, the specific day and hour, no one knows. But he's going to give them signs to be looking for that will be beacons of the day arriving. So let's talk about that. He says first, when you see. He's been talking about things they would see that weren't the signs. He was very specific. All the things people say today are the signs. He said are not. But here are some things you should be looking for. So he says, when you see in Mark 13, verse 14, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Well, that is really complicated, and I'm so thankful that we have more than just Mark to go on. I want to remind our listeners that Mark is writing to Jewish and Greek readers both. So he's got an audience that he knows is Jewish that's going to know right away when he says, let the reader understand. They're going to know about this abomination of desolation. They've heard of that before. These Greek readers have had most of a generation to understand the Old Testament by now. They're converted Christians, and so they're standing on the things they've learned from the Old Testament. And so sometimes he defines terms, sometimes he doesn't in the Gospel of Mark. And here he doesn't. He just says, let the reader understand. But let's go back to Matthew 24, because we're going to get some more information there. I want you to notice it's a parallel context exactly. I'm going to read a couple of verses that'll show he's talking about the exact same thing, but he gives some more information. And so we don't just have Mark's account, we have Matthew's account as well. And after that, we're going to see Luke's account, because Luke gives us the best information. But in Matthew 24, he starts in verse 15. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, Matthew's writing to Jewish readers more specifically, they know the prophet Daniel, and they remember that he talked about this abomination of desolation. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place where he ought not to be, is what it said in Mark. In Matthew, he said, standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. It's the same exact context, but Matthew gives us more to work with. There's something that Daniel had mentioned about an abomination of desolation, and the place where he ought not to be, the holy place. Now, here's where the imaginations begin to run wild, because clearly, if there's a person in the holy place where he ought not to be, it's the Antichrist, and so this is the end of time, and they begin to bring in texts that have nothing to do with this context here. Well, I want to tell you first off, the ESV that we're using as the base for this, I think made an egregious error in their translation. The word abomination, that phrase abomination of desolation, is masculine in its Greek gender. So it can be translated as a he. It can also be translated, however, as an it. And I think when we get to Luke 21, you'll see why a better translation here, and some of the other translations do this. When you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel, when you see it in the place where it ought not to be, is a better translation, because Luke's going to tell us what this abomination of desolation is. It's not a he. In Luke 21, when we go to Luke 21, and we're looking at the exact same context, but Luke is writing to a Roman reader. His name is Theophilus. We find out in verse 3 of his gospel. He's writing to a Roman. He's not going to use Jewish language and Jewish images, because this Roman guy's not going to get it. So he's just going to lay it out exactly what's being talked about. And this is such a helpful tool. Lay these three together and see all the detail. Luke 21, verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains.
So
it's the same exact context.
that's interesting. I didn't realize that he used the word armies there.
Yeah, when you see Jerusalem, the holy city, Isaiah 52:1, Nehemiah 11:1, even in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 5, when Satan takes Jesus up to the holy city and sets him on the pinnacle of the temple, talking about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is known as the holy city. So putting those three accounts together, we can understand more closely what the abomination of desolation is. It is Jerusalem in the holy city, the holy place, being encamped about by Roman armies. These are pagans that are in a place they don't belong.
Wait a minute. Luke doesn't mention the word abomination.
He does.
He does?
Yeah. He mentions desolation. Sorry. Yeah, he doesn't mention abomination.
He
He says that the
right.
armies surrounding Jerusalem will make desolate.
Now, you just brought up the word. You said that this something to do with pagans. When I went back to Matthew, the word abomination, I can't pronounce the Greek word, and I don't know anything about Greek, but the software I use makes it real easy to see the word. And it says a destination, idolatry,
Right.
pagan
Mhm.
abomination. So
Abomination in the Old Testament is almost always associated with idolatry. Abominable practices are what the pagans did.
and so now go back to what you just brought up in Luke 21:20. Luke says armies. So the abomination is the armies.
In the parallel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke together, the abomination that makes desolation is a pagan army. It's Jerusalem surrounded by armies. We know from history that that's the Roman army he's talking about here. He just says the armies here. Imagine he's writing this at Theophilus and he says, when you see Rome coming down on Jerusalem, he might get that letter confiscated. Theophilus might get in trouble. When he just says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, he's cluing in to this concept that there is this abominable that makes desolate. Daniel had spoken of that. We're not going to go look at the prophecies in Daniel, but he prophesied of this moment. It is interesting that in Daniel 9, 11, and 12, he mentions a time where there will be this abomination that makes desolate in the holy city. And during that time, God will have established or will be establishing his eternal reign. So people see that in Daniel and think that's got to be when he comes at the end of all time. Well, no, we've already talked about this in other lessons here. Jesus is already reigning. This is a judgment that's coming. That's certainly a judgment, but it's a judgment on Israel. In fact, that's what I want to really key on, is the language he uses here that everybody says this is clearly the end of the world. Well, look at the next verse. What do you do when you see the Roman armies coming, these armies surrounding Jerusalem? You flee to the mountains. So the world's ending, but in the mountains, it's going to be okay. No. Don't go take anything out of your house because that's going to get you caught when the armies come. You just leave everything behind. By the way, this imagery is not new. I want to show you in a second exactly where it comes from. But first, flee to the mountains. Don't go back and get stuff out of your house. Don't go back and get your coat. Oh, it's going to be rough if women are pregnant or nursing infants at the time. You know why? It's going to be hard to run. It's really hard. My wife used to call it the duck waddle when she was very pregnant. She can't run when she's got a big belly. Pray that it won't happen in the winter. It's a hard time for travel. In Matthew's account, it says that it might not be on the Sabbath. The doors of the city would be locked on the Sabbath, so Gentiles can't come in and do business. So it would be hard to get out. So they were to pray for these things. I know women who were fearful during their entire pregnancies and others who refused to have children because they were afraid that the end of the world would come during their pregnancy and there was this woe pronounced on people who were pregnant. It is such a horrible misreading of this text. Do any of these things make sense if Jesus is talking about the end of the world?
Not that. No, not at all.
What good is running to the mountains going to do at the end of the world? The whole earth is going to be destroyed. What good is it going to do to have your cloak at the end of the world? People aren't going to be worried about that stuff at the end of the world. But if you're fleeing from an invading army, you might think, oh, I better get what I can get and get out. He's saying it's going to be faster than you think. Don't run back to your house. In fact, the language he uses here, I think, is fabulous because he's cluing into some cues that the Jewish readers will know, and by now, even his Gentile readers will know. There's a little town that was really two cities together called Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19 that became sort of the premium example of destruction, of judgment from God, as fire and brimstone came down on them, and they were told, "Don't look back, don't go back," and to do what? Flee to the mountains. They were literally told to flee to the mountains. That's the language. That's the image Jesus is conjuring up here. This is a judgment from God on this city. Now, it's hard for them to imagine he's going to be judging Jerusalem, but he is. Why? They rejected the Christ. They pierced him. They put him on the cross. They used Roman hands to do it, Peter will say in Acts chapter 2. And they understood there. They were cut to the heart and said, okay, what do? We murdered the Christ, but the judgment on this city is coming. And this is how it's going to happen. So when these armies come, flee. get out of Dodge, or really get out of Judea. This judgment doesn't make sense if it's the end of the world, but it looks exactly like judgment that's come on other cities or other smaller nations. The language he's going to use over and over is the common language for the judgment of God on any nation. People say this is final judgment. In fact, it says, go to the mountains because there will be such tribulation as has never been and never will be again. And so this has to be the final tribulation, right? This has to be the end. I'm going to read a few verses. I'm not going to tell you where I'm getting them from. I just want to read them to you. And I want you to tell me if this is describing the end of the world or just some local judgment from God. All right, I'm going to start with the first one. Just a second. If you guys got questions or comments while I'm looking up, go ahead. But I want to read these. There's 3 texts I want to look at.
Okay, so you're not going to tell us what you're reading, though, from.
I will after I do it. I want you to hear them and tell me, do you think it's the end of the world or something else? And you may know once you hear the reading. So, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who's behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. That's an easy one. That's Exodus 11.
In fact, even premillennialists will say, no, that's not the end of the world. He's judging.
Clearly not. But did you hear the language? Does this sound like something that Israel would be familiar with, this kind of language? Yeah. They're all going to be wiped out, but you'll be saved. He's going to say that in one of the next texts. Not a hair of your head's going to fall. Not a dog will snarl against you, was the way he said it in Egypt. This is hyperbolic judgment language. They're wiped out. You're completely clean. Let me read another one. It's just beautiful to see these texts. And there's lots more. I picked 3 to choose from here. So this one, I'm going to start. Let's see if I can find the verse. Starting in verse 8. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I, even I, am against you, and I will execute judgments in your midst in the sight of the nations. And because of all of your abominations, I will do with you what I have never done, and the like of which I will never do again. Therefore, fathers shall eat their sons in your midst, and sons shall eat their fathers, and I will execute judgments on you, and any of you who survive I will scatter to all the winds. He's talking about Jerusalem there. Yeah. That's Ezekiel chapter 5, verses 8 through 10. That was the judgment when he took them to Babylon. And that sounds very similar to this. In fact, it's pretty graphic language. But that's the kind of stuff that they're used to hearing in God's judgment. And that's judgment on single nations. It sounds like it's the end of the world. Well, I want you to hear this one. Here's one that often gets confused with end of the world because of who the prophet is. But I want you to just listen to the text. Blow a trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. It is near, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. Like blackness, there is spread upon the mountains a great and powerful people. Their like has never been before, nor will be again after them through the years of all generations. That's Joel chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. This language of never before and never again is used a bunch of times throughout the Bible. And again, it's for a destruction or a judgment locally on a nation. And that's exactly what I am arguing is happening here. There's a nation being judged. It is God's people. It's the Jewish nation, but they've been judged before. They've been judged and found in favor with God when they came out of Egypt, but out of favor with God when they went into Babylon, and they're out of favor with God when they've rejected the Christ. So this language here that seems so hyperbolic doesn't have to mean the final judgment at the end of all things. It's the end of a nation, or at least the end of a situation that a nation's in. And over this language is used. And in all of those cases, God judges the oppressor or judges the one who needs to be judged, and he saves. He's capable of saving the one who needs to be saved, the one who's doing his will. And so as he talks about all this horrible destruction, he then says, but for the sake of the elect, those days have been shortened. Don't listen when someone comes along saying, here's the Christ, or there he is. I've already told you about that. Don't follow false Christs. I'm telling you what the truth is. So when they come, don't listen. And the ones who don't listen will be the ones who are saved. They're the ones who are chosen with Christ. They've chosen to follow him. He's chosen to take them with him. So for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. There's a really fascinating historical thing that happened with the destruction of Jerusalem. Normally, these sieges would take years and years, and Titus was to take the siege mounds and build around and let the people starve until they finally gave up. But what happened is the one who was on the throne, I can't remember who it was now, but the one who was on the throne died, and Titus had to rush back to Rome to claim it, or he was going to lose his stake on the throne. Somebody else would have beat him there and taken the emperorship. And so he very quickly ended up destroying Jerusalem, much faster than it was supposed to be. Jesus said that would make the days shortened. Historically, we see that the siege was much shorter than it normally would have been. But the point of all this is that God protects his own during these judgments. I read the one in Exodus 11 before on purpose, because there he protected his people. Not a dog would growl against them. They would not lose theirs if they were the elect. If they followed God's instructions, is the case there. They painted the blood on the doors. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, we're not going to read it now, but go look at 2 Peter chapter 2. It talks about God knowing how to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, but save Lot. To destroy the ancient world with a flood, but to save Noah. To destroy others and save those who are following God's will. God is really good at judgment, and he judges the ones who are lacking, and he brings out the ones who are faithful. That's the message he's giving them here. And he tells them, don't be led astray by falseness. Anybody who's caught up in the lies is going to be destroyed when the armies come. Anybody who believes Jesus is going to get out of Dodge. And I think you pointed out before, Drew, that Josephus tells us there were no Christians that were killed in these sieges. They listened and got out of Dodge.
And that also caused more anonymity, that's the right word, between the Jews and even the Jewish Christians, because the Jewish Christians wouldn't raise their hands to help the Jewish nation or the Jewish people against Rome. They got out
to defend Jerusalem. They weren't going to help. Right?
They weren't going to do that. Jesus did that. Kenny had sent over earlier today a couple of arguments that people will try to make. I just want to share one. Maybe in the future lessons we can go through more of these specific arguments. Sure. But this one is because you're talking about the abomination of desolation. Listen to the argument. It says Jesus cites Daniel in Mark 13:14, which you started with, which is often seen as eschatological. I'm saying that word right. But here's the rebuttal. If the abomination of desolation is just Rome's desecration of the temple in 70 AD, why does Daniel connect it with the end and final kingdom? There's the problem. They're asking the wrong question. Why do they think that Daniel is connecting it with the end and the final kingdom? Because they want to push that story. So they go back into Daniel and make Daniel say, or twist it to say, Daniel's talking about the end and the final kingdom.
Well, but he is. He says this refers to the time of the end. The final kingdom is the one Jesus is reigning in now.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
They want to make it sound like it's at the end of the world that it's set up, though. And that is not what the text bears out.
It's the end of the Jewish economy or the Jewish age. That's what Daniel was prophesying.
Absolutely. In fact, he was told this isn't going to happen for several hundred years, seal it up. But when it did happen, they were able to get comfort from it, that God had told of this. Jesus used Daniel's words to comfort his listeners, namely the apostles that were wanting to know about this.
Yeah.
He established his kingdom. That's why Daniel ties it to his kingdom.
I don't want to create a straw argument here, but this is an actual quote, right, Kenny, from someone who takes the position that Daniel is talking about the end of time.
Many people think that. They think that's what Daniel's referring to is, then because it pulls in. And
you used to believe that.
Right. Just coming from where I'm coming from, just listening to this episode alone, I wish I would have had this, because the logical points and how it points you right away. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, we understand and we explain that with the parallel in Luke being the armies, but let the reader understand. Then Carl read all those passages. We see that language. they would have understood that. And that's no excuse for us, because we should understand it too.
Amen.
If we're in our Bibles and reading and studying. I didn't. And most of these people don't. And they'll take this passage here and, like Carl said, no, let's look at these logical signs. They skip those signs because they don't make sense to them. And then they jump right down to false teaching and they say, see, there's the Antichrist. This is all about the end of the world. You can't just delete something because you don't understand it and try and twist it to meet something that makes sense to you. Like I said, if I sat and listened to this, I would have been like, man, this makes so much more sense. This is logical. And then you pull in, you mentioned Josephus before. If you want logical and you want to say, well, that Bible doesn't know what it's you want to go to history and accounts. Josephus even talks about that many false Christs, people claiming to be Christ, rose during that destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Like, that's secular history that's being recorded. You have all that against it. It just makes sense. It makes sense, and you can't argue it. You can't argue it. I thought it was really well laid out, Carl. It makes so much sense.
I hope so. I hope it's helpful.
It does make sense, but it won't sell books.
Well, I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm trying to get people engaged with the truth. That's what our quest is, right?
That's the difference. We don't have any books here we're selling. We don't have any storylines or movies that we want to make a movie out of. We just want to look.
The title of the episode should be "Let the Reader Understand," because we need to read our Bibles.
Yeah.
Amen. That's the issue. So
you want to end here and save for the next one, or you got another point?
So there's still a good bit more for us to see in Luke about this event, but I want to tie in next time some things that prove this is not talking about the end of time. So far, I've been laying out the argument and saying this, but I haven't fully proved it. I believe the next text we're going to look at, it'll be in our next podcast, God willing, will show without a shadow of a doubt that all of this stuff Jesus had in mind for what was going on, and they were going to see it. This is not talking about the end of the world, but something they were going to see visibly. So we'll see that, God willing, next time.
Perfect. I look forward to it. I can't wait to hear it and see it, and we'll talk about it some more. I want to thank you, Carl, for that. Thank you, Kenny. Look forward to seeing you both next time. And everybody in our audience, go to BibleQuest. Go to BibleQuest.org. Fill out the form there and tell us what's on your mind. You know, maybe there's some scriptures we're missing. Bring it to our attention. Let's talk about it, and let's get to the truth.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next time.